Hello everyone, John here from Gaming in the Wild, and I've got an interesting video for you today. It's my review of Hollow Knight's Silksong, at least as far as I got playing it. I'm on the record as being a huge Hollow Knight fan. In fact, I completed it to 102% completion, I think, in the end, over, a lot of hours, scores of hours. I spent quite a long time playing that game, and I was very much looking forward to Silksong like everyone out there pretty much. But the game is finally here. It's done incredibly well critically, but it's also kicked off a fairly wide-reaching and ongoing debate within the community about difficulty, among other things. I've played 40 hours of the game. I was at the end of Act 1, start of Act 2. I explored the map fairly extensively, took out some optional bosses, did some platforming challenges, and even looking forward to the game as much as I was, I have now put a pin in that playthrough, and in this review I'll be telling you why that is the case. I imagine there's going to be a spirited conversation in the comments, but I do ask you to be nice, and if you do enjoy this video, even if you don't agree with it, I would ask that you give it a thumbs up to help it spread through the algorithm and to help this small YouTube channel grow. You can also subscribe to Gaming in the Wild for more videos like this in your feed. There is a weekly audio podcast that you can find on your podcast player. That's also called Gaming in the Wild, and I will tell you all about the channel's awesome Patreon community at the end of the video. And with that, let's get into it and talk about Hollow Knight Silksong. So Silksong is of course the sequel to Hollow Knight, developed by Team Cherry, a 4-person studio who spent 7 years making the game at least. It is worth saying that there are over 100 people in the credits of the game, so there was lots of external support, but it is a 4-person core studio. The game has been a long time coming, and it's been an unusual case in many senses. It was announced way back in 2019, but updates dried up in 2022, and that led to a pretty frustrated, fractious, burned out fanbase who even lost faith in the game and thought it was going through some kind of development hell. All kinds of conspiracy theories and Silk posting and the clown face meme went wild online, but now the game is out, and we've since learned from a Jason Schreier interview over on Bloomberg that ironically Team Cherry thought that drip feeding regular info would start to annoy people, and that's why they stopped sharing info. Little did they know, I guess. We've also learned that the game was allegedly pretty much feature complete since 2023, and the team have spent the remaining time on polish and balance, unquote. And I think the polish side of things is hard to argue with. The game is technically and presentationally pretty flawless in my experience. However, any time spent on balance was a bit of an abject failure, I would say. The game is extremely punitive and punishing, and it has ignited a new difficulty debate online amongst critics and players. Staunch defenders of the game have been saying that it's meant to be that way and just get used to it, but even Team Cherry themselves have patched the game for difficulty once already, making adjustments to early bosses and hazards. So I think anyone who is interested in the Silksong discourse should probably acknowledge that even Team Cherry have downtoned the difficulty a bit, so that says something, I think. And I think it's pretty unfortunate that difficulty has become the focus of the conversation around the game, because there is a lot more to talk about in this game, and I will be getting to all of that in this video. None of this affected the review scores. The game is currently sitting at a 91 on OpenCritic, and I've been fascinated by Silksong's trajectory in terms of critique. Highly unusually, no review copies were sent out ahead of time. Team Cherry said it wouldn't be fair to the game's backers to let critics play it first when everyone's been waiting so long, so it launched as a complete mystery in a lot of ways. That meant critics were playing it at the same time as the rest of the world, and there was a lot of interest in how those first reviews would drop, and boy did they drop. 3 days after release, 5 reviews came out simultaneously, and for a while there, Silksong had a perfect OpenCritic rating of 100%, making it the highest rated game of all time. But those review scores were based on the kind of reviewers who could speed through the game, the most highly skilled maso-core game players who were able to basically speedrun it. So those initial reviewers were the kind of minority players the game was built for, you could say, but that is simply not the majority of players or critics, because don't forget, critics are players too. And as the slower reviewers worked their way through the game's grueling main path, that score has slid down by almost a full 10%. That still makes it a mighty on OpenCritic and a must-play on Metacritic, but I think it's an interesting part of the game's legacy, and as if the discourse wasn't fraught enough, it also kicked off a conversation about whether Team Cherry's approach was hastening the end of games journalism. But nevertheless, it got loads of 10 out of 10s, including from Gaming Bolt, Eurogamer, The Washington Post, and many others, and it got a few 7s and 6s as well. In fact, for the Video Games Chronicle, Ashley Schofield wrote the review that most resonated with me, I think. They said that the game has a uniquely tiring brand of deliberate cruelty. Ashley also made a really eloquent argument, I thought, that the Metroidvania and Souls-like elements of the game are actually in conflict with each other when it comes to to a holistic look at the game's design. So for me, Silksong has been a conundrum. It's irrefutably an aesthetic success with a genuinely interesting world to explore, but it harshly punishes the player for trying. It taunts and pranks and trolls and time wastes and frustrates, and that ultimately undermined its appeal, for me at least. I spent many of my 40 hours with the game fuming for one reason or another, and so I'm left thinking that this might be a beautiful, intriguing, attractive game with toxic tendencies and a bit of a bad personality. So safe to say that my experience with Silksong has been a bit of a roller coaster with some good highs and a surprising amount of low lows as well. I'll start with the good because there is a lot to admire about the game, mostly in the creative side rather than the gameplay design in my opinion. I think the art of Silksong is some of the most beautiful and timeless you will ever see in a 2D game, with gorgeous parallaxing that left me wondering if the game had made a shift to 2.5D. Even simple objects in the game have parallax layers like a water well or a bench, but they're actually just different parts that are scrolling at different speeds, giving the illusion of 3D, and I think that adds a sense of depth to the world of Farloom. And it is a place that is packed with memorable locations. I particularly love the times when there's out of focus, flowing water in the background, particles floating in the air, rustling plants all around the player in the foreground and background. It feels vibrant, overgrown, aged and crumbling, and just really full of mystery. The setting is also interesting. Our protagonist is Hornet, a sometime antagonist and fan favourite from the first game. Hornet is captured by some mysterious masked bugs and brought to an unfamiliar realm. She escapes and decides to track down her captor's masters. She travels a treacherous pilgrim's path through varied biomes towards a mysterious citadel in search of answers and maybe revenge. The pilgrim's path is well trodden and there are lots of little bugs making their way to the citadel seeking enlightenment, so along the way she passes a lot of camps of pilgrims. Most of them are lovable and weary little things, full of faith but not much sense. They're oblivious to the fact that there's some kind of mind control going on, and Hornet will regularly have to cut down zombie pilgrims who've lost their minds. But there are plenty of cute pilgrim bugs to meet along the way as well, and I always loved Hornet's dialogue. It is poised and courteous, clipped and firm, but also kind. I think they've done a wonderful job of fleshing out Hornet's character. She seems like a sharp huntress in all respects who heeds her own senses ahead of lofty beliefs. And she is gentle with these pilgrims. She will give them advice to be careful, to stay safe, or to rest somewhere secluded, or at the very least to take a weapon for the road ahead. And it's good advice because there is a lot of combat in this game. It is a singularly hostile path that Hornet is walking, and the combat in the game has been deepened with a variety of playstyles, different weapons, different speeds and ranges and so forth. The healing system has been reworked since Hollow Knight to up the moment-to-moment tension. You heal your whole bar or nothing, and it uses most of your precious silk, so it's less piecemeal than the healing of the original. Exploring Farloom is an absolute treat because of the game's movement. Hornet is nippy and mobile, and in true Metroid style, you start off just being able to jump and strike, but you will get all of those expected abilities, the wall cling, the dash, the sprint, etc. I particularly like the sprint, which is like the Metroid super run. It lets you clear large rooms quickly and gives you a satisfying long jump to bound over pits. And when Hornet is in full flow, I've probably never controlled a more nimble, responsive character on my screen. There are also some currencies to collect. There are beads that roll around entertainingly when you find them. Those are used to buy upgrades and use shops. You can string them together as a consumable item to prevent losing them when you die, which is a really cool innovation for like saving those precious souls like we saw in Dark Souls and Elden Ring. Some enemies also drop shards that you can use to refresh your weapon pouch. That pouch will expand to include a boomerang, throwing knives, traps and so forth, which will become indispensable in battle. The game has also added world building and story depth via side quests. Dotted around the world there are little mission boards where you can pick up side quests. Some of them are simple, like kill 10 bugs or find a missing person or deliver something from A to B. Some are more involved, and some players online have been saying that they found the side quests tedious, and they are extremely straightforward for the most part. They're fetch quests, but I enjoyed them as a break from the stress of everything else in the game. Going and killing 20 flies or whatever for their fine wings was fine by me, just as a break from all of the bosses and the dangerous traversal and so forth. So there is a lot to marvel at here, and a lot to fall in love with, and for a while I was teetering on the edge of really falling for this game, but various things held me back, and they all compounded slowly, tilting me in the other direction. And this is where we get to the game's many significant downsides. I think for all the praise I've just layered on it, this is a deeply flawed game. I think it contains some frankly calamitous design decisions that culminate into the feeling of a sweaty, unwholesome, get-good attitude coming from the game, and I think that undermines the game's aesthetic charms and thematic intrigue, so let's get into some of that now. always interesting to me how reviewers come up with their scores. You know, some reviewers start from 0 and they add marks based on everything good that a game does. Some reviewers will just play for ages and then do it based on vibes. Some reviewers will painstakingly mark the different aspects of the game out of 10 and then do a mathematical equation to figure out what it's worth. And then you have the final method, which is my personal method, which is to start out at 10 out of 10 and to ding marks off when there are really significant flaws. And Silksong has a few of them. First up, this game has a lot of precision platforming, and you have to do a big chunk of it with unreliable controls. Hornet's starting moveset is the Hunter Crest, which has a darting diagonal down swipe, and to me this is a disaster of ergonomics. I just couldn't reliably do it, and I know a lot of people out there felt the same. It had me changing controller between the Switch 2 D-pad, the Pro controller, an 8-bit Do controller, and even though a better D-pad helped out a little bit, I just couldn't input these controls reliably. I felt like I was doing exactly the right movements, exactly the same consistent movements, but every 4th or 5th time it just wouldn't work and I would fall and die. It's not just me, there are entire videos on YouTube dedicated to how bad this is, and after a bunch of hours of gameplay I finally found the Reaper Crest that reverts the down swipe to a perfectly functional Hollow Knight style, and from that moment on downstrike traversal and pogoing became a non-issue entirely. Suddenly 10 strong pogo courses posed absolutely no challenge at all. I was just flying over them in a really nice, intuitive way. So the fact that this was a widespread problem that was fixed by simply changing the style of input is enough for me to classify this as a game problem rather than a player problem. I died tens or scores of times because of this, and it caused me huge amounts of frustration, and I think it's a design flaw of ergonomics that would ding a full mark off the review score that I would give Silksong. The second big problem that I've got noted down here is cheaply inflated difficulty, which comes on a regular basis. This game has basic enemies that hit for almost half of your starting health. The same can be said for unavoidable traps and environmental obstacles, which you'll be hitting a lot because of that jumping I talked about. The game is hard enough and really doesn't need this unbalanced ramping up of the difficulty that just makes exploration tedious. In fact, it's so widely despised by players that mods have been made to address this stuff. And I think the biggest way that it's a problem for me is that in a Metroidvania, the difficulty will ramp up when you go into a new area or when you fight a difficult boss, but then there will also be mellow periods where you're just exploring, you're looking around, you're finding secrets. And I think that rhythm is really important for a Metroidvania game, the ramping up of pressure and then the release when you get to explore a new area. And I think by making basic exploration too hazardous, Silksong actually takes away some of that trajectory, some of that rhythm and some of that fun. It's a weird balance issue and an unforced error, and to me it is significant enough to ding another mark off Silksong's score. That brings us to my third big problem with the game, and that is cheap bosses. And I will say up front that some of the bosses in this game are simply excellent, like Lace the Fencer, who offers a crisp and interesting fight early on. And I think one-on-one duels are where the game really shines. It's like you're learning a dance, and in the end you can execute the steps flawlessly and take that boss down. It really rewards practice and perfection, a bit like the Mantis Lords in Hollow Knight 1. But there is a new type of boss in Silksong, which is just a mob boss, you could say, like Sister Splinter or the Savage Beastfly, and they are marred by floods of constantly spawning minions. These minor enemies clog up the arena, they distract the player from the fun of the duel, and I find this to be really cheap. It takes away that pleasure of practice and improvement by creating chaotic situations with elements of luck. That takes away the feeling of fairness. If you die because you were unlucky because minions spawned in a certain way, then that's nothing to do with your skill and your improvement, and it really damages that process of practice, improvement, run after run after run, getting better, and eventually the satisfaction of taking down a difficult boss. It makes it frustrating, it makes it feel random, and to me that is antithetical to the main central draw of boss encounters in these kind of games. So being distracted by crap minions, then being wrecked by a boss that hits for 2, having damage stack because of contact and short iframes, it's just annoying design, pure and simple, and it sucked the fun out of a lot of the boss encounters in this game. And I've got a little feeling that Team Cherry were adding this stuff, you know, in the years 2024 and 2025 when they were doing polish and balance. I've got this niggling feeling that this is what they meant by balance. It was balancing the difficulty upwards, having not exposed the game to enough players to know that it was too much, for a general audience at least, and that general audience includes me, and I know it includes a lot of you out there as well. And then the fourth big ding here is the egregious runbacks. A runback is of course when you have to go through several spaces to reach a boss arena where you just died and start the fight again. It's something that FromSoft have done in the past, but they rolled it back with Elden Ring, where you get like a summon point and a save point before any major boss. So even FromSoft have recognized that it's a problem and they've fixed it in their latest games. And for reasons that I will struggle to understand eternally, Team Cherry actually doubled down on boss runbacks. They're not just a couple of rooms that you have to go through, but they sometimes also include elite enemies, traps, and precision platforming, which makes getting back to the boss really frustrating. You just want to get back in there and continue the fight, and you cannot until you've jumped through a few hoops 10 or 20 or 30 times sometimes. That is just a waste of life at that point. You're just going through the motions and it's just frustrating, and that frustration ramps up and ramps up and ramps up. And I think it is just boring and demoralizing at that point, which is surely not what the intention was. So if you combine all of these factors, the unreliable, frustrating platform in the early game, the cheap difficulty with being hit for 2, with flying enemies next to precision platforming sections, the trap bench, etc., cheaply inflated boss difficulty with minions and so forth, and then the egregiously long runbacks, it all starts to feel like a pattern of trolling. There is a sense of the developer kind of sniggering behind their hands at the pranks and time wasting. And this is what I mean when I say that I think this is an attractive game with a bad personality, because you're lured in by the artistry of the world and the scenario, the wonderful characters, the incredible scenes and the mystique of it all, but then you are slapped around by this cheap and nasty approach to difficulty that just punishes the player again and again and again. I've heard some people reply to this complaint by saying they think it is thematically coherent because of the themes of penance and exploitation and punishment that the game contains. My response to that is that it might well be true, but I cannot stress this point enough. Things being intentional doesn't make them good. The problem here isn't that Team Cherry have failed to execute on their design, it's that their design makes for a frustrating, miserable player experience, for me at least, and even if it is intentional, it's still frustrating and miserable. So eventually all of this stuff just wore me down, and by the time I reached the Citadel Gate, after 40 hours of play, widely exploring the realm of Farloom, getting all of my mask upgrades, getting my silk upgrades, doing all of the side quests, I just felt worn down by how gleefully hostile the game was to the player, and it ultimately killed my appetite to continue through the game. It wasn't a rage quit, it wasn't a specific boss fight or a specific long run back, it was just this feeling that slowly dawned on me, a feeling of being tired of the game, tired by the game, and the realization that this game that I'd been anticipating for years was just making me miserable. It was pumping up my anxiety, which is bad enough. It was bringing down my usually fairly cheerful disposition. And in the end, it was a simple choice. Life is just too short to be engaging with a video game that trolls you and makes you feel bad in that way. It's not just me, many other players have felt the same way, and there is a thriving mod scene where players try to fix the double damage, the boss benches and so forth. I played it on Switch, so mods are not an option for me, and even if it would ameliorate some of these issues, it can never fix them entirely, it's just too baked into the design. So just one more final point before I round this out. I've been complaining about boss benches, and one reply that I've seen that is pretty common is that of course there aren't benches everywhere in Farloom, because the people of the Citadel are trying to disencourage and make the Pilgrim's Path a hostile environment for pilgrims to stop them from getting up there. To that I say, if Team Cherry really did want it to be a more playable experience, they could keep that theming and make it diegetic. So for example, like a pillar that has just fallen over, that's overgrown with moss, Hornet could just sit on that. So there would be different ways that you could put more benches into the game. Like outside of the chapel, there could just be a knackered old tree trunk, or you know, a large insect husk that Hornet can rest on for a moment, so it could be woven in diegetically, if that's what Team Cherry wanted to do. I will be fascinated to hear them speak about this more, and I've got a feeling that over the years to come, they will be speaking about it a lot. Once again, I think it is a shame that difficulty has become the crux of the Silksong conversation, because it is a wonderful world and a wonderfully crafted game. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Silksong is bad, I'm just saying that given all of those dings that I've outlined for you here, for me personally, it's a 6 out of 10 game. I would never go lower than a 6 based on the artistry on display. I would never go higher than an 8 because I think the frustrating experience and, you know, bailing out of my playthrough speaks for itself, really. Maybe I'll pick it up on Steam one day and try again with mods, but for now, my roleplay is that Hornet's hope died somewhere on the blasted steppes, and that is my experience with Hollow Knight Silksong. So that's it, that's my Silksong review for now at least. I can imagine what the comments are going to say. I can already see all of the get good scrubs and all of the angry taking downs of my review. So I will just ask, perhaps, you know, hopelessly, that people are just chill in the comments, that they accept a plurality of opinions, that they don't feel the need to attack other people in the comments, to attack me. We can all just talk about games here, you know, it's not such a big deal. And if you are someone who has made it all the way to the end of this video, I think you might be the exact kind of person that would love the quietude and peace of the Gaming in the Wild community. People who support this channel on Patreon support my work and support everything that I do from as little as $1 a month. You get an invite to the patron-only Discord. The way that I describe this is often, imagine social media, but if everyone was nice. There is a Silksong channel there. There is also a Hades 2 channel, as we all get warmed up for that game. There is a Death Stranding 2 channel. There are channels for all kinds of games, for indie games, AAA games, different platforms. People share gameplay videos. We all play Wordle. We play Guess the Game. There is a Fantasy Critic League. There is a Book and Game Club, where we read books and then play games that inspired them or are connected in some way. We have bracket challenges now and then, run by a patron, where game characters are pitted against each other and we all vote on them. And as well as that, over on Patreon, you get bonus podcast episodes from me, including game dev interviews, including travelogues about things like a trip to Tokyo, to Akihabara, Electric City. It's just a really good time, and you get all of the satisfaction of knowing that you are helping me out. I was a game dev layoff a couple of years ago, and I've been trying to get back on track ever since. The content that I'm making is part of that recovery, so you can help support me at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. A big thank you to the boss tier patrons, Keris, Shy Guy, King Champ, and Nate. We also got a full house of Alexes in the last week. We had an Alexandra, an Alex, and an Alexander all join in 1 week, as well as Steve and Cassidy. So thank you very much to all my new patrons. It's patreon.com/gaminginthewild if you'd like to join them. Link in the description and on the screen now. And with that, take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll see you on the next one.